Rugby is potentially facing a crisis. This could escalate into a crisis.
England have won the 2003 World Cup.
I don't really remember the World Cup period. I can't even remember being in Australia. It was just watching someone else play but looked like me.
It's Popham, who has not stopped running.
I had my diagnosis at the start of lockdown. We call it D-Day, Diagnosis Day. Ultimately, it's from my playing days. I didn't even realise that 90% of concussions are when you're not knocked out.
What's going on right now is that we have a group of players, all in their 30s and 40s, who have all been diagnosed with early onset dementia and probable CTE, which is a degenerative brain disease.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It is like Alzheimer's. It can start with memory loss, mood swings, and difficulty in concentration, developing into progressive dementia. There's no known cure. In fact, as things stand now, you can only be diagnosed for sure after death.
I have good days where I can sort of run around the field a little bit and play football, and then there's other days where I'm just in absolute agony and my headache, and suddenly think you can't see properly, and you just think to yourself, was it worth it? And I don't think it was. The main asset of this lovely game are the players, and we've got to make sure we treat them like that. We don't treat them like bits of meat. They're all human beings, and we've got to make sure that they can have a proper life after the sport as well.
The science of CTE is really unclear and quite controversial, except that the only known cause for it is being repeatedly hit on the head. The analogy people sometimes use is it's a bit like the yolk in a raw egg. If you think of the brain being suspended in fluid inside a hard case. So when you jar the head, the brain shakes around inside the skull. People understand this now, but for a long time people were under the impression that you could make the sport safer by making people wear helmets. Well, the helmets protect the bone, but they don't do anything to protect the brain inside, because the brain is still rattling around inside the head.
If someone pulls a hamstring or a muscle or anything like that, they look after it straight away. Your brain, and that's exactly the same. It's got to be looked after. There's more to life.
It's important to say that there's a spectrum of opinion within the academic community and within the scientific community. And you'll find people at the more progressive end of it believe that there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that collisions to the head cause these diseases. And there are people at the more conservative end of it who would absolutely deny there's any link whatsoever, or at least just say that more research is required and we really don't know anything at this point. We have typically thought of this as being a concussion issue. What's becoming increasingly clear is that it's not necessarily about concussions, it's about impacts to the head, and you'll hear those described as subconcussive blows.
Basically like Chinese torture, where, just the drip, dripping away. My neurologist described it as a leaking tap. So a leaking tap dripping on a piece of mud once or twice, there wouldn't be a mark there at the end of the day, but if it dripped for 14 years, there'd be a big hole. And that's what's happened during my career.
In this country, the obvious parallel would be with football, which is going through its own dementia crisis at the moment.
Findings will fuel concerns that players' brains are being permanently damaged.
England's 1966 World Cup winning team suffering from dementia.
We're talking about heading the ball, and players obviously aren't knocked out cold by heading the ball, but we're still seeing that over the course of a playing career, the repeated impacts can add up, it seems, to long-term neurological problems. And if that's the case in football, there's no reason why it wouldn't also be the case in rugby.
My game was all about contact, being aggressive, being in people's faces. That's what I was renowned for and was good at. I was told from a young age, if you went into a tackle at 90%, you could get injured. So everything that I did involving contact, it was always flat out. And that didn't matter if it was in training or in a game. 85 to 90% of the contact is done in training.
The NFL, American football, they've really been at the forefront of this issue for the last decade.
Huge decision has just been made in that NFL concussion lawsuit. A federal judge has approved the class action settlement involving more than 5,000 former players. The settlement provides as much as $5 million per player for serious medical conditions associated with repeated head trauma. The players sued after accusing the NFL of hiding the dangers of concussion.
They've actually reduced contact training. They've limited the amount a player can do per season. and they've been doing that for the last decade. The players are asking that rugby does something similar. They're also calling for a reduction in the number of substitutions, and there's a push really to see fatigue come back into the sport, which sounds a strange thing to say, but the idea is that as you get tired, as the game goes on, the impacts are not so great, the tackles are not so fierce over the course of the 80 minutes if the players aren't so fresh. And they're also calling for more rigorous scans and tests to be done on players who have suffered concussions throughout the season.
When I played in France, you used to have a scan at the beginning of the season for your heart. Why aren't they not doing that for your brain? So you get your players' permits. It's not about being soft. You could still have a great game of rugby, but there are safer practices and there are safer ways to train.
We just want to come together from the ex-players, the scientists, the professionals, and look at this as a whole to try and be part of the solution to make rugby safer, because I don't want people who are playing now to be in the same position as me when they retire and have the diagnosis I've had.